Welcome to 22-1 for PhDs with Ashley and Dave, where we spend 20 minutes sharing two perspectives on building a successful industry career and leave you with one actionable step to help you start preparing today. In our last episode, the first of this series, we focused on what I consider to be the primary difference between academia and industry. What is created? Academia creates knowledge, and industry creates profit. Well, this fundamental difference leads directly to the other four key differences we will talk about in the rest of this series. And the one we will talk about today is what is pursued. In academia, we pursue a complete and full understanding. We dig deeply to completely understand whatever topic we are studying. But in industry, we pursue results.
I'm super excited and a little bit nervous to jump into this topic today. I feel like this is one of the big gaps, like you said, between academia and industry, this sort of understanding versus results. Getting to dig into a topic is not only necessary in academia, but it's also one of the most fun things we do as researchers, like fully understanding it, getting into the nitty-gritty, going deeper and deeper and deeper. So I'm excited to hear sort of the industry perspective on this one.
Yeah, you're right. It is absolutely, it is fundamental to industry, and it is a challenge because it is fun to dig completely into a problem. And in fact, we'll talk about a few stereotypes in this series. We can talk about one today because there was one based around this. In industry, there are many stereotypes of PhDs because, of course, most people in industry don't have one, and the habits and the thinking patterns we bring into industry can sometimes seem a little different to a lot of people there. The stereotype related to this one is that we don't focus on what really matters. Or maybe in a more detailed version, people in industry think that we're just interested in studying a problem for a long time and fully understanding it. But of course, in industry, we have to solve problems for our customers. You know, they may say, well, a PhD just wants to study some problem and write a paper, but hey, we have to, as we talked in the last one, in the last episode, we have to make money here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is what we have sort of been doing in our training is just spending years and years on a certain problem. So it totally makes sense if PhDs are sort of prone to that when they get into industry, is spending a lot of time solving a problem. So I'm really, really stoked to talk about how we can sort of shift that mindset for folks looking to transition into industry. So today we're talking about understanding versus results. I
Right.
think I know what's going on with the concept of understanding, right? The sort of full capturing of a topic and knowing the nuances. But what about results? What does that mean? Because I feel like I'm driving results in academia, just maybe different results, just like you might drive different results in the gym versus different results in the laboratory. So what are some examples of results that might happen in industry?
Right. The word results is pretty broad. And I mean, we even may use it for test results. I know I did when I worked in a lab. Um, People may think in academia may think of, well, a proposal out the door is a result, or a paper, a published paper is a result, something like that. In industry, the clearest way to think of this, let's go back to what we talked about in the last episode, that industry needs to create a profit. That is the fundamental thing, right? We need money to survive. We have investors who are looking for a return. We need to create profit. And so results in the industry sense ultimately result in, there's the word, in something being shipped out the door to a paying customer. That's the result we need. And then there are plenty of other results that are steps towards that. But that is really the big difference. Is the thing you're working on, working towards, is that a milestone that ultimately will result in us getting a product shipped out the door to a paying customer? Anything along those lines, even if it's somewhere in an early R&D effort, could be considered a result. But maybe to make it a little more clear, let me contrast it against just an understanding. And let me go back to, so my own PhD experience. I worked with a lot of instrumentation, and we were doing a lot of really precision work. I'm a physicist. We did precision measurement in laser spectroscopy. And so it was really important to understand the error bars that came from, the errors that would come from the different instrumentation. And that might, as an example, include some precision measuring device that was in a location where the temperature fluctuated a lot. It's important for us to think about what is the temperature dependency on that. And as part of my PhD and my research project, and before I can publish this, I may need to do a full characterization of that instrument and take the temperature in the room up and down. Maybe the sensor device itself has its certain temperature dependence. It's accurate to zero point 0.1 degrees C, but then there's if the temperature goes up, maybe that shifts, perhaps that shifts. I'm going to want to fully characterize and fully understand that. And that could take weeks to do it right, to set that up right. But only if I do that can I really get the detailed information I need. We would do that as far as a part of making our data set as accurate as possible. But in industry, in a similar project, my I may not want to do that. What we'll want to do instead is a quick test to see how big is the fluctuation, how big is the variation, and if we decide it's within the noise or not enough, we'll probably just say, okay, let's not even bother with that. A different way to put it is my manager doesn't want to pay me for 3 weeks to measure data that doesn't really help us get to the accuracy that is needed. If we decide it's important to meet the specifications of whatever we're building and shipping for a customer, great. If not, we don't need to know. And my manager, excuse me, needs me to move on to something else, some other problem, some other result that is actually, as we've said, a key milestone in getting product out the door.
Gotcha. Okay, this totally makes sense. I think this is getting at something that I've experienced in my PhD as well, which is the idea of sort of perfection, like data sets that are completely full to the max, right? Everything is perfectly controlled for. I work with mice, so that's several cohorts of mice. That's several months of experimentation. When in reality, sometimes you can get a hint of the answer and move forward with less of that, right? So maybe a cohort of 5 mice, and then you get a very clear answer and everything looks great. So why spend the next 3 months trying to get to 10 mice when we can sort of move the answer forward, or excuse me, move the experimentation forward? Now, I understand for publications, that's a bit different. Obviously, I'm not advocating for tiny sample sizes or anything that is not well controlled, but I imagine in industry, this concept of perfection or this concept of perfectly controlled environment, sort of like what you were talking about, can sometimes be just a delay and not necessary. And so I think that might be an area where I would struggle personally, is not fully filling out the testing or the characterization, as you said.
We do struggle with this. Many of us do struggle with this. It's very relevant. Your point about perfection is a great way to think about it. We may never truly get to perfect in an academic research lab, but my experience is you're always striving for as close as possible. And in fact, think of researchers will often, even if they get to a certain level with one experiment and they publish it, it almost always contains what are we doing next, and that will be the steps to get even better. This is another PhD stereotype in industry, actually, that we always want to keep making things better. But perfection, the attitude in industry on perfection is it really doesn't exist, and we don't even want to get to it because perfection, if you could reach it, is way too expensive. There's a phrase, several variants of this phrase that are used in industry. The one that I like is shipped is better than perfect. It gets
Mm.
at the issue of what we really need is something out the door to a paying customer, and all it needs to do is satisfy them. And in fact, that can often be far less than perfection. The way we handle that in industry, this will depend on the industry, but in sort of instrumentation and areas that I've worked with, there will be a specification. And that is an agreement with a customer about how good it needs to be. And that is really important. You have to have that because otherwise you don't know how good enough is. Good enough is not that's good enough. No, no, we want to make it really, really good, but not better than what is needed by the customer. And so that specification becomes a target. So we're not trying to chase perfection. We're not trying to continue making it better. We make it good enough. We then double check it to make sure it will reliably be good enough. We don't want to ship sloppy work. And then we move on to something else.
Sure, I like what you said about perfection being expensive. I think I had never really thought of it that way. Currently, any expense I have is, I mean, yes, there's a financial expense to what I do, but the primary expense is time. So
Mhm.
for me, it's spending my own time to sort of chase that perfection. And I know both financially and time-wise are very expensive in industry. But I think I might push back a little bit. So we talk about PhD stereotypes. I'm going to just throw out an industry stereotype real quick. Just because when we were talking, I'm realizing I have a stereotype towards industry that you alluded to, and I'd love for you to elaborate on because I think it's really important because you did touch on it. So, understanding versus results. We are
Mhm.
saying that PhDs delay a lot of things or they spend a lot of time trying to be perfect or trying to get that deep understanding. But in industry, sometimes when I hear you talk, I feel like you're rushing. I feel like you're just trying to ship out a product and get the profits and get the results and go, 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 hit the bottom line, make this shareholders happy. But you alluded to it and you said, we're gonna double check it. We're not trying to ship something that is poor quality. We're just trying to do it efficiently and move forward. So, how do you respond to this stereotype of industry is just rushed and trying to just, make other people happy and be fast and get money from the customers and like that's it?
Yeah, that is a reasonable perception. It certainly coming from academic research, it can absolutely look that way. The pace is faster, and that is one of the first things PhDs notice when they go into industry is, wow, timescales are so compressed here compared to what we're used to. This isn't a project that will last a couple of years. This may be a 6 month
Right.
project, and we need to get something out. And it can feel that way. Now, there is no, I like to say it's a game, not a formula when I'm talking about industry. There is no formula for getting that balancing act, for doing that balance properly, balancing speed and accuracy and certainty. But it's an art, and that's part of being good and successful in business or not. You have to play that game and say, how fast do we go, but how much effort do we put into making it really good also. And I'll take it back to specifications. That's where that is really a key. If you agree on the scope of the project, the specifications for the product, the specific outcome from a development project, whatever you're doing, if you agree on the goal, you quantify it and make sure you're very clear and everyone agrees, is this good enough? Is it good enough to satisfy the customer? Is it reliable enough to work for them? Then once you agree on that, then it becomes a matter of, okay, now how do we get there as quickly as we can?
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, I actually, speaking of time sales and sort of compressed time frames, I actually spoke with a consultant in industry for my PhD pass project who said the time scale was actually one of the his most favorite things about his job was the fact that projects lasted maybe 4 to 8 weeks instead of 2 to 4 years, and that can actually be sort of very stimulating, very exciting, and very challenging in a good way. And so it might be a little bit of a shock for PhDs, but it can be very enjoyable, especially when we are used to working on one problem and not really seeing the fruits of our labor until several years down the line. Another thing I've been thinking about as you've been talking, Dave, is this concept of an end user. So with our PhD work, the end user, sometimes the people who read the paper, but the person who's going to use my information generally is just my lab for perpetuity, right? Like we just kind of keep building and building and building. So this idea of a customer or a patient or some other form of user or stakeholder is a bit different in industry than it is in academia. And so I imagine in industry, especially, having that end user is probably very motivating for you to drive results and go faster than in academia because you have somebody in a way that you have to serve or deliver something for. So I think that that could be sort of an inspiration for driving this mindset shift as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are several valuable things in what you said there. I'll start with the last one, that end user, having that paying customer. That can be very exciting. A concern that many PhDs have leaving research is, boy, am I really going to enjoy leaving this environment where I can kind of learn whatever I want and study it for a long time? Am I going to like that? But many of us, most of us, maybe all of us, find that once you realize you're solving a problem for a customer, that starts to become very exciting. Some of us realize, well, that's a lot more fun than writing a paper that might be read by a dozen people. And maybe it becomes part of some real application in 20 years. No, yeah, I mean, in many cases, you sometimes get to meet the customers, you learn what they're doing, you realize how your work is helping them, and that can be very exciting. And that makes that fast pace exciting because now it's like a race. There's a real goal, a tangible and valuable goal. We're not just doing this for its own sake. Knowledge is great to create, academic research is wonderful, but when you do it, you publish a paper, a lot of the time it's kind of like, okay, now what? We don't know what it will be used for, who will read it, who will do this. And when you move into industry and you realize there are people that need our work and we can help them move on, and we might even be something we read about in the news or in a journal, magazine about some advancement in technology, depending on what you do, or medicine or whatever, that becomes very exciting. And it all becomes a really fun part of the game.
Absolutely. So many PhDs I've spoken to have talked about their favorite thing in industry being the impact, being able to drive impact and work on these really cool problems that they see results from in greater time scales. But the impact, it's just impact and impact and impact. And so I think this understanding versus results, these results are impact that you're driving in real world situations. So it's very, very exciting, I think, to think about. I also think I imagine, I'm thinking back on the stereotype that you've mentioned, it's probably really important for PhDs to communicate to hiring managers or folks that might get them a job that they have this results focused mindset before they're hired. Because if industry managers have that mindset of PhDs want to go deeper into a problem rather than solve the problems, sort of take longer, then that might be an issue for PhDs trying to find a job. So, how do you recommend that PhDs demonstrate this results focused mindset while they're trying to get hired?
So, absolutely, that is an issue. Absolutely, that is something that PhDs need to think about in looking for a job. The way to do that, my opinion, stories. Tell stories about projects you've completed, results you've delivered with those projects. Describe why those results matter. So, in an academic research setting, it is so common for us just to describe our experiment. We may talk about the goal. We may talk about the instrumentation. We may talk about the precision we're achieving, all these various things that in an academic setting, at an academic conference, for example, might be totally understood and appreciated by other people working in a similar field. But that's not going to work very well in industry. And that will give the hiring manager or anyone else at the company the impression that perhaps you are one of those stereotypical PhDs. But if you can tell stories about results, that can make all the difference. So let me give you a couple of examples from my own background, the stories that I learned to tell when I was finishing my PhD and looking for my first job in industry. So as I mentioned earlier, I worked in laser spectroscopy. We used tunable precision, high precision lasers to do a variety of things in a lab. And what we did isn't important, but the point is, when I was looking for a job, instead of talking about, I did a high precision test of special relativity, for example, Einstein's theory, to show that it was accurate to 3 parts in 10 to the 8th, or instead of talking about the atom interferometer that I built, and I mean, the lead-in stories, talking about the interference of matter waves and all of that, I told stories about things that I had done. For example, I had a very complex tunable laser that was an instrument that had to work at the ultimate precision on a daily basis. And it's got multiple mirrors and it drifts over time. And so I had to develop a process. When I'd come in the morning, I could get that laser lined up and operating the absolute best possible very quickly. So I had a process for doing that. That process is something I could train other people on. That could be a result. That's more quantifiable, something that somebody in industry might pay attention to. Or I might talk about the interferometer architecture, the hardware that I put together. Turns out it was not as stable as I had hoped it would be, and there was too much noise, and I couldn't see the interference fringes. So I had to build an optical stabilization system that allowed me to stabilize it actively and collect the data. Things like that are results. Now, of course, it doesn't mean I don't talk about my experiments at some point if the conversation continues or if they ask questions. It's that these are stories I might lead with to help them see I'm focused on results.
This is awesome. Thank you for providing those examples. Even if maybe I didn't understand the beginning part about your project, I could understand the results and the impact from the way that you translated that. So, perfect example of how PhDs can sort of do that now. And I think this could be a really great way for PhDs to start practicing. And I think we can be really good at it. So for this week, the action that we have for folks is to think about a story you could tell that showcases not the great science you've done, but some types of results you've achieved or value you've created. So an example could be streamlining a process in the lab to save time, or mentoring a student who went on to complete their honors thesis, or maybe even collaborating across disciplines to solve a tricky problem. Insert your details where needed, but focus here on results, not on the details of the science.
Exactly. This will be a great head start for the stories that all of the PhDs listening to this will want to collect when they start looking for an industry job. And a key point I'll make, as you pointed out, even though you don't know anything about the specific science I did for my project, when I started describing the results the way I did, you got some understanding. This will be important in industry as well, because there's a really good chance the people you're talking to in industry don't really understand the details of your science. But when you're talking about results and telling a story about that in the right way, they will start to understand. That is also critical. So that's it for this week. Next week, we will talk about moving towards these results with speed versus certainty. It's an elaboration on what we started to talk about today. Stay tuned.